everyone. Welcome to take 2 of this week's MSP Business School. I managed to screw up our initial recording, so we are doing this a second time today.
We love you, Brian. We love you.
It would have been better if we kept going, but that's fine.
But anyhow, again, I'm Brian Doyle, and I'm here with Tim McNeil and Rob Rogers, my co-hosts in crime here at MSP Business School. And, what we were talking about before I managed to make a little bit of a challenge for us here was we were talking about the fact that we've all been chatting with our customers. We're doing our end of the year runs. We're starting to do strategic planning for 2023 and, understand what our customers want from us and those kind of things. And I think on both sides of the fence, we've been hearing a very common theme coming up, which is, hey, there's a lot of new inflationary pressure. There's a lot of new challenges coming on. How do I get to the right comp plan to serve me today and in the long run? And commission plans have always been a challenge. And I know we've done previous episodes on them. But man, it seems to be a very front of the mind topic for most customers that I'm talking to, at least these days. How about you guys?
Yeah, very much so. I'd say somehow more now than ever. And I think a lot of it is because of that inflationary, just everything that we're in right now. Called inflation, recession, combination of both, whatever it might be. And even within, I believe we have talked about this more on the hunting side. I think maybe not as much on the account management side. I've seen a shift personally in account management compensation recently within the last 6 to 8 months, where I've seen multiple MSPs go into more of a all-in compensation model with no commission for their account managers, because they don't even want the slightest chance of a negative perception that those account managers are going to be making money by selling their client tech or selling to their client tech. They might be eligible for a bonus if they hit their overall number on a quarterly basis. But the shift has been pretty drastic recently, I would say.
That's pretty interesting, Tim, because when there's always been an argument against the all-in model because it fosters potentially negative production, right? Or the why do I need to do any more kind of attitude. Quiet quitting, right? We hear a little bit about that, but if you're an account manager role and we're talking about serving our existing accounts and we want to do things like our QBRs, but not have them just come off, as I always hear the complaint is, customer just thinks it's a sales event. And I'm like, well, that's a presentation problem, probably not a content problem. Mm-hmm. And, when we're seeing those things, it's interesting to hear that people are looking to an all-in model. I do agree there has to be some sort of bonus component, though, some sort of incentive to get that person to do just beyond the minimum. But that's pretty interesting. How about you, Rob? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'm seeing, I disagree with that model, the all-in model. I disagree with that.
I do too. To be clear, I do.
Okay, perfect.
But hey, it's worked for a couple of people I've talked to. So
it is, but the sell is different, right? When you have that, we don't get paid commission. We're strictly here as an advisory role. And if you're in that position already where you're defending yourself, then you have already failed the presentation anyway. So you've got to work earlier in the presentation on that. There's a lot. Look, and I get it, man. It's hard right now with all the pressures that people are getting from inflation, or the perception of inflation, the perception of, salaries being raised. It's hard for owners. But when is the right time to change a commission plan? Is one of the questions that you have to figure out. When is the right time and how do you do it? Maybe it was too rich earlier and you've got to pull it back a little bit, or maybe nobody hit goal and you had people leaving. And so you have to change and kind of move it up a little bit. So there's a lot of pressures on the owners to get it right. And then how do you change it if you got it wrong, which happens all the time? And how do you move forward from there? So those are the kind of things that I wanted to talk about today on, what I'm seeing out there, the kind of, how do you build that roadmap? And then when you have to do it, what do you really do for the account manager or for the new logo guy or girl,
Well, to that point, I mean, I think Sean Walsh, who we had on here at least once, maybe twice, he's actually our business coach. He had probably the best statement that I've ever heard in regards to commission, whether it's an account manager whether it's a farmer or a hunter. If somebody sells something that is commission based and they can't figure out what that commission is going to be, at least very closely what that commission is going to be within about 5 seconds, your comp plan's way too complicated. And I know that doesn't necessarily solve the issue that we're going to be talking about today, but just it's more of a general statement of for anybody out there looking to adjust compensation models, make sure it's simple.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid. It's just the way to go.
Yeah, you see a lot of these comp models with escalators, percentage plans on net profit in some cases and gross profit in other cases, and then where they're getting outside subscriptions, based on recurring, some are paid up front. I mean, I remember some of those plans.
Got to have a slide rule,
and salespeople want to know, hey, if I attack and kill, what's my reward, right?
Yeah.
If I slay this lion, am I making $200, $500, $1,000? What's the number associated with it? And that's a great statement from Sean.
And I don't mind, Brian. I don't mind if you have different commission levels, right? Like if you're trying to build carrots towards the things that you want to be sold, like on the account management side, if you're trying to do a white space analysis and you're trying to really attack one product and you up the commission in that area, that's fine, right? Like you're rewarding for something that you want your rep to go do. That's completely different than building buckets and escalators and this and that and the other, and nobody can figure it out, and then the rep just gets frustrated, right? So yeah, I totally agree.
We once had an MSP that we worked with that to simplify their commission plan, they created a second spreadsheet.
Yeah,
that
I remember that. Yeah,
that did not work.
One spreadsheet's just not enough.
It wasn't enough.
Why have one when you can have two?
Well,
right?
and might as well keep going after that.
Yeah.
I mean, shit, 3 is better than 2.
All right, so let's talk about where the commission plan do's and don'ts don't come in. So maybe let's start off with. Do you want to start off with the don'ts and really talk about some of the hazards we see, and then get into how you can rectify them and what you should do?
Yeah.
I'll kind of lead off here. If you as an owner make a commission plan and you see at the end of the year you paid too much money and you overpaid last year, the rep crushed goal, right? They were 120, 130% over goal. That's okay. And you can change the commission plan for that, right? If it's too rich and you went the wrong way, that's fine. A rep will understand that. But you have to have maybe a 60-day notice that you're going to be making changes to this. And it has to be 60 days where the rep says, okay, so I understand what's going to be happening in the future. And that's how you can build that. It's okay to change commission plans annually based on oopses on the ownership level. There's nothing wrong with that. So I don't want people to think, oh gosh, you can't, if you have a plan, you can't manage it or change it, but just make sure it's front facing, it's future facing.
And that's not probably an uncommon problem when people first tip their toe into the sales pool, right? You tend to make a plan that's going to help entice a rep to come on board, but then sometimes the success outweighs what the real cost is.
And you had no idea, right? Yeah, totally get it. Yep.
And also the average MSP owner, I'd say that first sales rep or two that they get, the base salary tends to be a little bit lower. So the commissions are a little bit more aggressive, right? But then there are absolutely instances where somebody comes in and they start really hitting their goal. And the owner sits back at the end of the year and they're just like, whoa, that's a little bit more than I thought. But just like Rob said, that can all be adjusted. You just need to have the right amount of runway. I think we have seen many times since we started OSR, whether when we were lead gen or now sales management as a service, we've seen a lot of MSPs just change their comp plans almost on a whim, multiple times a year, just because something didn't, the wind blew wrong, basically. And that is a recipe for disaster if you have an engaged rep. So that's just something to always be careful of.
You said something there that kind of hit with me too, which is, sometimes they look at a rep's compensation and they just don't like how much it is. Right.
Yeah.
You'll get that owner that'll be like, the guy's making more than I am. I actually dealt with that in a partnership I had where our CEO really had a challenge that our reps were making money. And, I used to always look back at it and go, but are we losing money?
Yeah.
Right? That's the simple question. I said, he's making money per the plan. He's doing that. Don't let this be an ego-driven decision, right? You, as business owners, your value comes in two sources. One, absolute dollars you put in your pocket. Don't forget to include those perks you run through the company too, that also reduce your top, your net or gross earnings, right? Yeah. And then the final piece of it is your sales rep is not going to have, when you go sell this thing someday, there's no reward going back to your sales rep. Unless you've cut them in the pie, right? So you're paying for somebody to help accelerate the value in your company overall. And as long as that's profitable to the level that you feel your company needs to be profitable, don't let ego get in the way of what reps make. I have some other companies that really believe, hey, if my reps are making more than me, then we're doing this right.
We're doing it right.
It's ego is always going to get in the way when you're an owner. Like there's always going to be that that kind of hurts a little bit. But you've got to step back and say, okay, this is for the betterment, right? Like just like you said, as long as you're hitting all your margins and you're within where you need to be, who cares?
So
you're the one who's going to benefit from it in the long run, not them.
So number one, don't let ego play into the decision. Number two, that I think we were starting to touch upon here, is when to change the compensation plan and how frequently is acceptable. So do you guys want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. My opinion on that is if you're changing it more than once a year, I think that's too much. Like even that's a lot. I mean, if it's your first go around with the sales rep, whether it's a hunter or a farmer, and that person's there for 12 to 18 months, and you sit back and you say, okay, I missed the mark. We're paying out too much. Then you have every right to sit back. You should know at that point where you need to be as an owner or a part of that leadership team for that rep, again, whether a hunter or a farmer. You should know where you need to be. So, I mean, there's actually a pretty strong argument that you really should only change your comp plan once, right? If all things remain equal, which we know they don't, things change.
Yeah, and I think, where I look at it is I'm more of the ilk of the annual, not an annual change, but an annual update. And what I mean by that is a lot of times in the plan that the core of it's going to stay the same. But what might change is a commission level down a percentage or two based on economic conditions, or accelerators changing because what we saw. If your entire team is crushing quota and hitting accelerator by August, you probably have underestimated what quota should be and need to change that accelerator a little bit for the greater good of the organization. But, those are the kind of tweaks that I would expect to see potentially in an annual play. Mm-hmm. But to your point, I think you're right. The core guts of the plan should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, I'll throw a little nerd stuff your way, right? Do a little math. All right. So for all the math guys, here we go. For your rep, if your rep is making 3 times, if they're bringing in 3 times to 5 times of their total COGS, your rep is killing it. They're doing a great job and they should be highly compensated for that. 3 to 5 times. Now, what does that really mean? All the projects and everything that they bring in. But on the MRR side, you count the first 3 years of any deal. If you have a 2-year deal, you always give it 1 more year, because the average in our industry is over 5 years for a client to be with an MSP. You don't give a rep 5 years in your calculations, but you do give them 3. So if they bring in a 2-year deal, you assume that you're going to get 3 years of value out of that deal. And then you use that for your calculations on your 3 times multiplier or your 5 times multiplier. 3 times is really good. 5 times is very good in an annualized basis. So if your rep is bringing that in, they should be making money. They should be, well over into 6 figures, and they should be bringing in a lot of money for you. And you should be killing it because you're making so much more money on that rep than they're bringing in. That's how you know that you are doing a really good job with that rep. And if you change that commission plan on them because you've done something wrong, seek outside help before you make that change. If your rep is bringing in 3 to 5 times, do not change a thing until you talk to somebody in your peer group or something like that.
Well, I would also add to that, if you are getting that 3 to 5 times and you're still in some sort of financial struggle from an operations standpoint, that is, if you're not in a peer group or have a business coach already, it's time for one.
Yeah, you're doing something's wrong, and it's not the rep's fault.
Yeah.
So I think number 3 here is don't create a comp plan without some outside influence.
100%.
Outside understanding.
100%. Yeah.
So, anything else you think in the do column? Because I think we want to take is some of the nerdy math that our resident nerd brought to the table here, and kind of go into the fact of some of the do's, right? Mm-hmm. So, what I'm really hearing from you there, Rob, is do look at your numbers and do evaluate your numbers. And I think, do number 1 has to be know your numbers, right? And I'll come back to that in a moment. But what you're basically saying is I sell a 2-year rep or 2-year plan as a rep. I'm only going to get paid for those 2 years.
Correct.
But as a company, I can assume I'm going to extract 3 years of value minimally from that customer.
Correct.
So if I project out for 3 years on what my break even is going to be on my 2-year payment, that's really what I should be looking at for my comp plan.
There you go. And we just completely nerded out and threw out the math. We got the slide rules. Yeah. It was fantastic.
Well, the inner nerd.
3 sales guys in a room.
The inner nerd in me was able to keep up with the concept, but I wanted to reiterate it in, good old simple layman's terms, right? Sure. We're betting on 3, getting 2. Let's all run to the casino because that seems like good odds.
That's great odds. Yeah. Right? Great odds. And the renewal is going to happen, and the rep doesn't get paid on that. The hunter.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Maybe the farmer, but
maybe the farmer.
That'll be another
depends on your company. Yep.
All right. So do number 1, know your numbers. I want to expand on that know your numbers too, and say, if you don't have an idea of what your gross profit is, if you don't have an idea what your net profit is, if you don't know what your operating costs are, and you can associate a cost of goods with the services you deliver, how are you going to build a comp plan?
Well said.
So you've got to understand, look, based on the last 12 months, even if this isn't what I think we're going to be long-term, this is what we made. And this is what our comp plan has to be based off of.
Yeah.
Now to that, I'm going to probably be a little counterintuitive with where you guys were going a little bit earlier, but do make some level of adjustment. The reality is, as we scale, one of the things we tend to do is expand our bench. And that may change our costs for delivery a little bit. We start getting some true, when we start, everybody's a jack of all trades, master none, wearing many hats and contributing to the bottom line. But when we start building out a larger organization and those middle managers come into play that are managing workflow, but not really generating new revenue or contributing to cost of goods sold, it could impact the bottom line. So I think one of the things that you've got to have in play too is, under this concept of do know your numbers, is you've got to have an annual look back where you're able to look at your numbers and say, how have they changed? What have you guys seen in the marketplace around that?
I mean, this year, it's been a mess.
Sure. Let's start there, right? We're doing this episode now. Nobody cares
about
last year.
Everything this year has broken the rule in regards to how fast inflation accelerated. So it's just a weird year, right? Like I guess I'll go back to, I'll take back what I said before, that you should only change it once. I mean, I do, Brian, I think you're spot on when you say you should do incremental changes, right? But what I meant by that was, if you're severely off, you should only really make one large change, and then there should be incremental moving forward. Yeah. This year kind of breaks the rule.
Right. Well, I mean, but this year's real, and everybody's experiencing it unilaterally, right? Yeah. Costs are going up, for better or for worse, in a lot of key areas, especially key areas we deal with, right? Just look at the trucks you got on the road and the cost of fuel as an example, right? Those things are going up. So, if your costs are really going up and your 40% gross margin is now down to 34, let's say, right? And in the meantime, everybody's asking you for an 8% increase, right? Because that's what they're feeling. it's not going to work, because all of a sudden you're going to make all these changes and your margins might be down to 22% and you might not have enough for that rainy day anymore, right? So you've got to look at, so there's only a few levers you can pull there. You can raise prices, which is probably the obvious one that you need to do to maintain that level and then spread the wealth accordingly. But if you can't quite raise prices to the same extreme as you've got to increase costs, that's where you might have to look at your commission plan and put a little tweak in it on the 1 or 2%. But also remember, a lot of that is just on acquisition cost, right? Yeah. So you've got to also silo out how much of this acquisition cost is that, how much is that really going to make a difference? Because 2% down on commission isn't going to solve 2% company wide. Yeah, it's only going to impact the revenue that comes in through that customer acquisition piece. So I don't know, I mean, the reality is everybody's fighting that battle, but you've got to look at the entirety of it and say, what levers can I pull to make the adjustments, and have frank and brutal conversations with people when you do have to make those adjustments.
And I've never met an engaged rep who didn't understand that. Right. So like every time I have to have this hard conversation with, our employees that we're managing all over the place, they get it. They get that times are hard right now, but what we do is with one hand we pull away, the other hand we offer an idea. So if we have to take away something, like we have to take away the activity bonus, or we have to lower the commission, we lower the commission on some things, but then offer a higher commission on something that is a very profitable venture. So we're giving them an ability to still have something that they can chase after, but at the same time we're taking away from like the known risks that we have out there. One example you were alluding to a little bit earlier is what happens when you're growing a little bit, you have your sales rep, and now you got to add a little bit of marketing in, and you got to start giving your marketing. So now where does that money come from? All of a sudden you're adding more to your operational costs. Where does that money come from? It comes from the commission side. Right? On the reps side, it comes from the commission side. Any lead that's coming in from a marketing engine that you built and that you're paying for comes on any success comes from the commission. So it's not like you're adding more. It's not like you get a marketing qualified lead from whomever out there, like one of the companies out there. It comes into the rep and then they get a free lead. They lowered their commission in order to get that qualified lead, so they didn't have to go out and prospect. So it comes from them on that side of it.
Right. We used to always run like an inside sales commission. Anything that was inside our marketing driven, you gave up 2.5 points.
Yep.
And paid it back to that. But I would also counter that the owner has to understand that cost needs to be absorbed through accelerating opportunity, right? So a big part of that marketing cost has to come out of how many customers do I need to acquire to break even on the marketing cost without penalizing anybody, even though I'll get a little bit of a clawback on the rep, and then, and then move forward from there. So, hey, if marketing is going to cost me based on my average deal, 7 deals a year to win, then I better track whether or not I'm getting 7 to 8 deals.
Get your 7.
Yep. Getting a 7 and how fast. So do number 2, let's start with do number 2 is really have conversations with your sales reps about these different changing forces. The truth is, and you kind of hit on it, Rob, sales reps are an open group because they are the ones that actually are closest to the front lines. They're hearing the same stories from their customers. So unlike your engineers and folks on the help desk who might not really be hearing it and seeing it, there's no way your sales rep, if he's going out there and seeing customers, hasn't heard a little bit about, what's going on cost-wise, because it's not industry specific. It's across the board.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I would add is for anybody out there who's listening to this, if you haven't read Profit First by now, that's something you need to do today.
Mike McAllowitz, guys.
Yep. You either need to get the Audible version or get the book and read it. I'm not saying that's going to solve all life's problems, but it will help you designate dollars in a certain way where you can sit back at a point and say, okay, now it's time to get a marketing person, or now it's time to do this, or now it's time to do that.
Now it's time to pay your tax bill.
Yep. That was my takeaway from that book too. Yeah. I love that book. It changed us. It was a good book. That was one of the good ones out there.
It made the end of year tax burden a hell of a lot easier. Let's put it that way.
All right. So I know we're getting near the end of our time, but we've got 3 don'ts and 2 do's so far. So, maybe we've got another do that you guys feel is really important from a comp plan standpoint.
I guess what I would say is just, look, I'm okay with putting in kickers depending on how successful a rep is being, or is, if they have a track record of being successful, that is, especially now with the inflation. I think that is one avenue you could go down. Just be careful with it, right? If you have an engaged rep, like Robb said, they will understand that changes need to be made. But make sure that the changes, if you are going to make a change, make sure that it's not going to be automatically to the detriment of the salesperson. That would be one of my do's, maybe don'ts too, I guess. I don't know, depending on how you look at it. Just be tactful. Just remember that they are a human, because sometimes that doesn't always happen, and they oftentimes have a family to feed. So just make sure that you're careful with it. And if you're careful with it, everybody's going to understand, right? They just will.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the performance-based spiff, right? So when I had my first sales job, which was in telecom, we actually had weekly quotas, right? Friday's hero was Monday's hero was our statement we live by.
Oof.
But what we used to have was what we
those.
called pick money. If you hit quota 2 weeks in a row, you got to pick a ball out of a bucket, and whatever number was on that ball, that's how much cash you were getting handed in your hand that day. The balls topped out at $100, but you could make $50 to $90. The old adage was, hey, because you hit quota 2 weeks in a row, go buy dinner. And this was $95-$60 to buy you dinner back then. And, and then if you hit it 3 weeks, you would get 2 balls. So basically each week you would get another ball. So in aggregate, you could make 200 or 300 if you were hitting it. Some of us actually banked that into our plan. I'm like, all right, I've got to make sure that I'm stacking my deals in a way that I'm going to hit quote over the next 5-6 weeks, because what ended up being nominal money to my company was changing money to me. And I looked at my best year of pick money, which was my second year before I left there. I made almost $4,000 in kind of off the book. Shouldn't say that, revenue through spiff money, but it was it was dispersed to me in, $100 a week, if you will, kind of format.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Very good. So one week was, or so like a good week for you was 2 balls.
Huh? Yeah. Well,
Okay. Okay. No, I'm just like
look,
two,
if I could get 2 balls, but I was a big fan of trying to get that 3rd ball.
Okay. All right. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Okay. So fellas, I think
it's time to end.
Huh?
I think it's time to end.
Okay.
Yeah, with that, we'll end. While Robb goes in, I'm not going to say it here.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's about communication. If you're feeling uncomfortable with a deal that you're doing with a rep, and maybe you feel like the rep it didn't do their part, and maybe it was your lead, and you like something needs to change because it's making you uncomfortable. Talk about it early. Talk about it often. And the rep will understand. Like the reps just don't like it after they do everything. They're expecting the money, and then you say, "Hey, by the way." That's the wrong way. That's the don't. The do is if you have a change that you want to do and based on a particular deal, just tell it as soon as you're feeling that way. The earlier, the better, and they'll completely understand. So with that, fellas, the commission do's and don'ts out there. I think this is a good one. This is definitely something that's on a lot of people's mind, as you were saying earlier, Brian, with some of your clients, and this is something that could definitely help out there.
Yeah.
So fellas, until next time, I wish you guys all the best. This was a great episode. This was a good episode, fellas.
Yeah.
And now it's officially an episode.
Yeah, now we can end.
Because Robb let us know it was great.
Yeah, it was a good episode, fellas. Okay.
All right. So Robb, you want to take us the rest of the way home? Where can people listen to this thing?
Well, I mean, you can listen to this on mspbusinessschool.com or anywhere that you get your podcast, Brian, to include YouTube. So, Brian, subscribe, hit that bell,
smash that like button.
That's right. Vote early, vote often, Brian. You know the motto.
Yep.
And, after that, fellas, I wish you guys all the best, and we'll talk later.
Sounds great, guys. Thanks.
Have a good one.